You'd rather make your show out of books coming out of the boxes versus books coming off of the wall. I think there's just any number of reasons why they can convince themselves that their pricing is justified, whether the market bears it or not. You kind of get the sense that no collectors are buying a lot of these bigger books anymore. They're just passing back and forth from one dealer to the next, and somebody takes a haircut, the next guy feels like he gets a good deal, so they try and jack up the price, and it's just this cycle of turning books.
For years, Heroes Con has been hailed as the best Comic-Con, not for its celebrities or its Funko Pops, but for actual comic books, a place where collectors gather for the hunt, dive through those dollar bins, and make memories with the community. But this year, something felt different. Sure, the vendors were there, the boxes were on display, but the deals didn't seem to be on the table. Has the con scene, even the purest ones, started to lose its edge? Is online buying killing these things, or are collectors expecting too much? Joining me now from the popular YouTube channel, Como Comic Books, otherwise known as Drew, bringing his firsthand experience at Heroes Con to dispel myth versus market reality. Drew, thanks so much for hopping on the channel today. It's good to see you. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, good to see you. Glad to be back home. It's been nice to be back in my own bed, but had a great time out at the show, and just happy to be able to have a chance to share some of the experiences we had last weekend. It's hard to believe it's already been a week at this point.
Yeah, well, now with a week away from the show, I thought it'd be interesting to have you on because you're somebody who's been there, many years in a row. I think that this is, however many appearances you've done at Heroes Con, and I wanted to get your initial take of the show. I have to share with the audience. Initially, when you got there on the Friday, you immediately sent me what I would quantify as kind of a little cheeky, snarky picture of a wall book price that seemed very, very elevated. And I've been hearing a lot of murmurs and conversations about how, the show that is supposed to all be about the collector and where you get the best deals and swag, you got to fly out to North Carolina to make sure you go to the show, is maybe not what it used to be. As someone who's been there for many years in a row, how did you feel like this show was? And I guess we could start with sort of those kind of wall book prices that you saw.
Yeah, well, first, I guess I should take ownership of the peer pressure I put on you, try and convince you to come out to see all this firsthand. Didn't work this year, maybe next time. This is actually only the second time I've been to Heroes. The first time I went out was 2016, so kind of before everything went completely crazy in the hobby. I was with my family at that point, so this time it was pretty much just a boys' trip, a bunch of us split a hotel and went out there, so it was all con all the time. With our vendor passes, because all of us had press badges, we were able to get in actually during setup on Thursday after we got into town, but we hit the floor pretty hot and heavy early first thing Friday, because as much stuff as was out Thursday, there were things coming out of boxes for the first time Friday morning. And I had a pretty short list of books that I was really prioritizing. My whole goal when I went was I only wanted to bring home one, maybe two books at most. And the first thing I did was just hit the floor to try and find that top tier, see what my availability of books was. And the picture you're referencing, I actually found one dealer. This wasn't somebody I'd known before, not a big national dealer that you see all over the place. But when somebody pulls out two copies of Detective 140 and hands them to you, and that was one of the books on my short list, you kind of, you take notice. That's a book that's kind of hard to find a copy of at your average booth. So to see two of them at one spot was shocking to me. But once I saw the prices on these things, I understood why this guy still had not one, but both of them. The lower grade one had a price tag of $11,500, and the higher grade one had a price tag of $13,500. Now, I don't remember the exact number, but I think a slabbed 3.0 sold for $6,000 and change recently. So basically, this guy was absolutely bonkers on his prices. It was a good booth, though. He had a lot of really interesting stuff, a lot of really good stuff. But like I said, his pricing kind of explained to me why he still had a lot of this stuff. And I haven't seen this at a lot of shows other than Heroes, but this guy was somebody who employed this. But it's just there were literally stacks of some of these books on his wall. It was wild. He had, I don't know, 6 or 7 TMNT threes, just tons of 181s. It was really odd, but like I said, his pricing kind of led him to do that, and then got over into some of the other dealers that you see around. And it's just at this point, I don't look too close at what they have because I know it's just the price is going to be crazy. I did find one other book that I was looking at. Unfortunately, he just got it in. The price honestly wasn't too bad for that. It's an expensive book to begin with, but it wasn't something that was going to work out. He was a little high and just a little bit more than what I was willing to drop.
Well, let me ask you, more about that, and just like, maybe more in just your overall feeling. And I guess as it relates to the back to that dealer, like obviously we've had so many conversations about, the 2021 prices and dealer walls and stickers being, like, double the price and triple the price, and
Yeah.
and dealers not wanting to, update, a lot of their stickers and things like that. But maybe naively so, it was sort of my impression that, Heroes Con was this, place where, dealers just give away books like candy. It's the place to go. You gotta,
Mhm.
you find every book there, and it's, 3 copies for, the price of one. But was that really the case? Is the show overhyped in that sense? Or am I wrong to think that this is the place where you can be finding great deals? What would you say to that?
I would say the vendors at the show are as diverse as the comics you can shop for at the show. So you can go there and you can dig through 50-cent bins, or you can spend 5 or 6 figures on a book just based on people's inventories. And the dealers are kind of that same way. You've got some of the local folks that, it's they get to go home and sleep in their own bed every night. They've got a half hour or 45-minute drive in. So their overhead's low. They can bring whatever they want. They can price however they want because it's just a show to them. It's not comic book mecca for them like it is for a lot of us. It's just their local show. Then on the flip side of that, you've got the national guys that you see all over the place. They're out there doing what they do, and what they do typically is not handing out deals to comic fans. The secret to Heroes is you can find as good a deal as you're willing to dig for. If you're going to just walk the main aisles and check the end caps and just stop by the vendors that you saw at C2E2 or you're going to see at San Diego, if you just shop the same people, you're going to see the same prices, which tend to be high. But when you get off the beaten path, you get down into the side aisles, into just the inline booths where you've got a 10 by 10 space that is literally stacked 10 feet high on all 3 sides, just crammed with stuff. And you've got, Ma and Pa Kettle in there peddling their 4-color wares. You never know what you're going to find. I saw some really awesome stuff. And as the weekend wore on, when you find those people, as the weekend wore on, those people are definitely more inclined to wheel and deal. And, I found a Darkhawk 1 in a 50% off box, and I tell you, it was going for 60% off at the time. That was like first offer. I probably could have got it for 70% off.
Yeah, somebody who obviously collects that book, you never see it on sale, so you would have been a fool
I
to
know.
not have bought it.
I'm sure it was still expensive enough I wouldn't have been able to eat for the rest of the trip had I pulled the trigger on
Clearly.
it. Had I had some more space, I really probably could have came back with some great stuff to pad my own inventory. It's all about the effort you're willing to put in. If you're out there getting into the smaller booths, talking with the people who maybe don't rely on selling comics for a living, you're going to do a lot better out there.
Has that always been the case, though, that you had to work really hard to find that deal at that con? Or was there a time, say pre-COVID, in going to cons, not even necessarily Heroes Con, where it was sort of, we'll call it easier to just walk up to any booth, stroll up, find a key, be like, great, this is like less than what you can find on eBay? Or is that kind of faulty logic or faulty thinking, or rose-colored glasses to think that there was a time when you could do that?
Honestly, I feel like there was a point in time when the community was a lot smaller, when it wasn't cool to collect comics. Comics were still kind of taboo or a nerdy thing, that the community was a lot more of a community. We still use the word, but we don't treat each other like that anymore. So It used to be as long as the dealer made a little money that they needed to make, if they could give somebody a book that they wanted at a good price, the buyer felt like they got a good deal, the vendor made some money and did all right there, everybody left happy. When you're dealing with the people in the upper echelons, it's not that. It's top dollar plus some a lot of times. Fair market value almost seems like the basement number. It's like I would be tickled to be able to buy some of these things at fair market value from some of these people, but it's just it's not the case. It's a lot more cutthroat now. It's a straight up numbers game. They're not so worried about building relationships or taking care of people. They're out there looking for just wonderful American dollars. And I can
Right.
appreciate that to a certain extent. If it's your livelihood, it's your livelihood. But, you know, you look at people like a Walmart or something, they made their money running volume, not profit. So I think there's
Right.
just a little bit of a loss there, that a lot of the bigger dealers are more than willing to just sit on a book due to scarcity, desirability, whatever it is. They're going to hold out for that top dollar profit versus moving the book, generating revenue, and maybe not making as much as they could.
Heroes Con, what makes it great is that there's tons and tons of vendors, a lot of which are those mom and pop sort of vendors that this is the
Right.
one time a year that they do it, and by all likelihood, those are going to be the ones that you find some of the best deals. The problem is, though, during setup, when vendors are kind of loading in and doing their whole thing, a lot of action happens before the con. So you have a lot of, the bigger fish vendors going up to those mom and pop booths, buying out some of the things that they can, and literally taking those books, moving it to their wall with, a 20% markup. Has that always been a thing? And is that part of the problem with what is happening now, at least from like collectors' experiences when they go to cons, being like, why are these prices so high? Like, was there ever a time when that didn't happen as much?
I started setting up in 2012, I think was when I did my first show as a vendor. And for as long as I've been on that side of the curtain, that's just the way it is. The first show I set up at, a big national dealer came over, and I was actually setting up for my local comic shop that I worked at the time. We had this awesome high grade bronze consignment collection in. And this dealer went through, and by the time he left my booth, I could have just turned around and went home. My booth was paid for. I had, four figures of profit in my pocket, and the show hadn't even opened yet. So that was my introductory experience into being a vendor at a comic convention. And I honestly think that people just go around looking for the fresh blood, the new guy setting up, and that may be where they can actually find some margin on stuff, catch somebody who's new, who doesn't really have the lay of the land yet and has made some mistakes or came in priced fair. And oftentimes when you're starting out, desperation may be too strong of a word, but you've gone and taken on a bit of debt sometimes, or a large amount of expense at a minimum, and every sale can almost make or break you. So when you're just starting out and somebody shows up and starts waving those dollar bills around, you can make some decisions that maybe in the long run wouldn't be so good. And once you get established, you're not as reliant on every single sale. But I think that's just the way it is. I think that's the way it's gonna be. I don't know. I may get a little bit of a bad rap anymore because honestly, I don't set up at shows to sell to other vendors. So a lot of times I'm always the guy who's like the last one finishing putting up his wall books and stuff like that. People
Right.
will come by and want to hassle me and look at this. Like, I'm not doing that. Come back when I'm set up and the show's open. I want to sell to the collector. But they do that because it works. By the time the people walk onto the floor that have paid to get into a show, collectors, VIP passes, even, it doesn't matter. I would say the majority of the deals are gone.
I guess that's one of the inherent problems with coming in and pricing things fairly, is that the irony is, or just the fact of the matter is that if you price something fairly, well, someone's going to buy it. So
Right.
the reason when you go into a con and it feels experientially where you're like, why are all the books overpriced? It's because, well, those are the books that are overpriced because no one's going to pay those prices. The ones that were fairly priced have already been bought or marked up now that they've already been bought from other people and other dealers. So, it's kind of like when you see an eBay buy it now, it's why it's like 3x the price versus what a lot of books that sell at auction are going to go for, because the ones that are listed there because nobody's buying them. And that's kind of
Right.
just how the whole game works.
And here's a little secret. As a dealer, you like to sell wall books because it's a big ring on the register, right? But the secret is you would much rather sell stuff out of the boxes. You'd rather make your show out of books coming out of the boxes versus books coming off of the wall. It's a lot easier to replace books in the boxes than it is to replace books off the wall. And the profit is typically significantly larger on your box books than it is on your wall books. So there's probably a little bit of that built into the pricing we see on walls at most conventions and in eBay and other places. The keys are always the keys, and they're the desirable ones. And as high as the demand may be, they're just as hard for dealers,
Yeah.
or just as in demand for dealers as they are for collectors. And it's just, I don't know how we get away from that being the case, especially when you have a certain amount of dealers that are out there building their own inventory off of the inventory of other people who are selling comics for profit.
Tell me more about like just the feeling of the show, or like kind of we'll call it like the culture of the environment of the vintage market. Was there a lot of kind of bin book action? Was a lot of wall book stuff? I mean, famously on my channel, you said before, I think this was 2023. You were like, this 2023 is going to be a bin book year. I think you totally nailed that one.
Yep.
2024 still kind of felt maybe a little bit that way. Maybe it was a little half and half. And then now
Yeah.
here we are in 2025. What do you kind of think the vintage market where it's at these days?
Well, with Heroes specifically this weekend, it's all types. I mean, I was in a group of people who went out there, just like Instagram chat, and there were guys going out for everything from massive keys to wanting to dig through 50-cent bins. So it's all relative to the collector, I suppose. As far as the general feel of the show and kind of how some of the vendors were talking, what I heard was a lot of vendors that were pretty happy. We're having good weekends. We're really happy with where they were at various points in the show. And then there were other vendors who were expressing that they weren't so happy with how it was going, that things were slow, things were down a little bit. And I think the most telling split between those two groups is that the people who had reasonable prices that were in line with the market, were the ones that were having really good weekends, or the people that were willing to wheel and deal and work some magic with interested customers. They were having great weekends, whereas the people who were more rigid, more higher priced, maybe a little more out of left field as far as their pricing structures, they were the ones who were having slower weekends and not being quite as happy as you'd expect. How the general market is right now, it's so weird out there right now. I feel like there's so many deals that you can find on eBay. I know anytime I'm looking up a book, it's just on there for, trying to get some pricing on eBay sold. I'm constantly blown away by the deals some people are finding on eBay, especially with auctions, even some buy it nows at low prices. I feel like people are getting to the point where if they're able, that's another thing, just economic pressures hitting people different right now. But I feel like a lot of people are trying to get back up onto the wall, back up, maybe even if they can't go full blown wall books, maybe into that mid tier $20 to $50, $20 to $75 book range, and trying to make some hay in that area. While that particular price point is expanded to so many books that were previously, $100 or $200 or $250, however. high, some of these things got. There's just been so many books that have fallen back down out of the rafters that are accessible now that haven't been in previous years. And I think that's going to continue to be a trend
Yeah.
for the foreseeable future. Right now, unless things change, but I don't really see much happening out there in the hobby, the greater hobby, that's really driving interest or driving value holistically across large swaths of the community or across the hobby at the moment. And maybe I'm
Right.
just sitting over here like a grumpy old man on his porch, missing the obvious. But
Well, it's a big summer movie event. Maybe Superman is going to spawn the golden age of DC keys. Coming up in the rest of the year in 2026. But not to get into that or to derail into that, but to ask you, you did mention online buying at the time in which we're recording this, and when this is coming out. We have a big Platinum Heritage auction weekend going on right now, and I just thought it was interesting because already, as some of the sales have come through, there's a lot of books out there that have certainly performed well, but like a lot of books underperforming and a lot of crazy deals. And I just think to myself sometimes when I see some of these like major keys, major high grade keys, that it's like, if you saw this at a Heroes Con, you'd be, wow, this is one of the great wall books, and it's severely underperforming. And I just think to myself, well, if I'm somebody who's a player for this book, like, and I can get the best deal, just buying it online,
yep.
at this auction versus having to go to Heroes Con and find that book. Why wouldn't I just do that? What do you think the dealers think about the online space and online buying here? You mentioned some of the dealers that didn't have as good of a show
Mm-hmm.
were the ones that were probably a little more, stickler on their prices and not willing to move and stuff. I always wonder if some of those dealers, are aware of how available a lot of this other inventory is. Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I think they're aware. I think a lot of times, at least the people that come to my mind, as we're vaguely referencing some of these guys, they're the same people that have online stores that generate sales for them in between shows. So maybe that's part of the reason why they can be a little more rigid with their pricing in person at a show when they've taken on this additional expense and overhead to sell books, is that they know in the background they have this website that's working for them 24/7, generating additional revenue, generating additional sales, maybe even, God forbid, building out relationships with customers if people like to pay high prices on the regular. That, I think that could be part of it. But for the most part, I also feel like some of these folks feel like they are the comic book convenience store in a certain sense. They're maybe view themselves as being more reliable or more trustworthy than an unnamed internet seller, whatnot person, eBay store, what have you. They've been around a while. They've built up a name. They've got slick promotional materials and all this stuff. But I think there's just any number of reasons why they can convince themselves that their pricing is justified, whether the market bears it or not. And I don't know. I look at some of these books, and I don't watch a lot of the auctions nearly as close as some of us do. But some of these books, there's 100, 200 copies of them floating around, and you kind of get the sense that no collectors are buying a lot of these bigger books anymore. They're just passing back and forth from one dealer to the next, and somebody takes a haircut, the next guy feels like he gets a good deal, so they try and jack up the price, and it's just this completely continuous cycle of churning books. And it's like the book never finds its home because the dealers just keep playing hot potato with them.
I'm curious what your thought is on, just the idea of, bringing that short box to, get artists to sign stuff, and, the whole machine behind that.
Yeah.
I don't know if over the years you've seen it increase in terms of like people doing this more and more. I mean, certainly there's always been people that are, getting books signed to flip him, but
Hmm.
I don't know. The rumblings have been, louder more recently about this whole habit. And I'm curious what you think about it.
Right. I mean, my first Heroes experience was similar. I was behind somebody with the biggest flatbed dolly, or one of those convertible dollies that I've ever seen in my life, just stacked with long boxes. And Roy Thomas, who was there this last weekend, was there at that particular show as well. And I was stuck behind them in line as they literally got a long box of books for Roy to sign. And it pissed me off. And frankly, if I was somebody in line behind anybody this weekend that was doing something similar, I probably would have been upset about it too. I understand the desire of it, and honestly, the way the industry's changed, where now it's so easy to be a seller or a flipper of comics, I think it's just exacerbated the issue. Whereas before, it would have been people who were like comic shop owners or dealers themselves at somewhat of a professional level doing this. Now with Whatnot, with eBay stores, I think it's just a larger pool of people who have a need or a desire to want to do this. So I don't think it's going to
Yeah.
go away. I think it's going to get worse. And, I saw several instances of it this weekend. I think the best thing to do would be to, if that's how you want to approach it, contact these creators beforehand. See if you can't set up a time before the show or after the show to where you can drop those books off so that the line can move. But on the flip side, I also can't throw too much hate at these creators. There's a lot of them, especially if they're not working anymore, or not working full time. Con revenue is a significant portion of how they support themselves. So I can't blame them for turning down what is essentially their livelihood at this point either. I think it's just, there's got to be some sort of a balance that if you want.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting thing that you brought up because I hadn't ever really thought about it before. On the one hand, like you said, I'm very sympathetic to like if a creator has the opportunity to sign 500 books and they're going to pay him $20 a pop, I mean,
Yeah.
by all means, I'll sign everything you want.
Hmm.
But it does create a drag on a line if there is a line,
Yeah.
or makes people wait. And in theory, a lot of people who are at these places going to these cons, this is their one time they they came here for this one thing. They want us to get this creator signature, and this might prevent them from doing that or whatever it is.
Hmm.
And it's interesting what you brought up about, yeah, before it used to be an LCS or some sellers, and maybe that LCS would set up, a artist coming to their store and they do the whole thing and make it more official. And so there just weren't as many people that
Hmm.
had Whatnot accounts or eBay lives or Instagram lives and all this stuff.
Yes.
So it probably was just enough sellers and flippers to where it wasn't really an issue. But
Hmm.
nowadays it is, because everybody has their 100 copies that they're going to go live on their Whatnot stream immediately after to flip and sell. And don't get me wrong, if they want to do that, that's totally fine. It's just that it adds to this feels bad experience, I think, for a
Hmm.
lot of people that are in these lines trying to just get a single or two collectibles signed from their favorite creator.
Yeah, I think it's made the logistics of the con experience a lot more complicated,
Mm.
because now it's all a gamble. If you've got 10 signatures you want to get in a day, you've got to try and prioritize, okay, who do I absolutely want to get? And you've got to strategize on top of that. Is it going to be better to go to this person early? Will that person probably be slower later in the afternoon? It's just, there's this whole new dynamic that congoers are having to navigate, because you can lose a significant portion of the day in a single creator's line. Scotty Young's line was crazy. Chris Claremont's line was crazy, which, like, guys like Claremont, it's always crazy long because, well, he did some awesome stuff, but he also takes the time with each person so that when you finally do get up there, you have what's hopefully a legitimate or meaningful experience. It's not just you slap the book down, he signs it, and you go along your way. There's a lot of people that's all you get, and if you wait in line that long and that is all you get, it just at a certain point doesn't seem worth it anymore. So it can really impact people's experience with the con itself, with the hobby in a larger sense. And it's, I think it's all about just managing expectations and really, figuring out what your priorities are, and just kind of going with it and hoping for the best.
Well, Drew, thank you so much for your insight. This is really, really good to hear. And I guess maybe some final thoughts from you as someone who's been to Heroes Con and someone with the expectation that this is the con of all cons to go to. Do you still feel like Heroes Con lived up to the hype?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I took two buddies who had never been before. Both are very well versed in comic shows, comic conventions. Both of them said it's the best convention they've ever been to, hands down. And it's not like it's just in passing they said that. Like, you're walking around over the course of the weekend, it's like, man, this is the best comic convention I've ever been to. It's also got the ratio right. Usually when you're at what we call a Comic Con these days anymore, you get 20% comics, you get 80% all the other crap. At Heroes Con, it's 80% comics, 20% the other crap, and that's probably being pretty conservative. It's probably more like 90% comics and 10% other stuff that's still somewhat comics adjacent. So it's one of the few times where you feel like you put out the money, you put out the investment to get to one of these shows, and you're actually being served what you're expecting to find. For that reason, I still think it's the best comic show I've ever been to, particularly at that scale. Heroes Con is what San Diego used to be before Hollywood took over. And I understand why a lot of these promoters have done what they've done over recent years. They've got to do what keeps their shows relevant, what keeps their business alive. But God bless Sheldon Drum and, the Heroes crew for giving us one last place to gather around and actually experience a Comic-Con. It's that great. You should be there next year.
Well, with a sales pitch like that, I probably will have to go and I can do an actual firsthand reporting. But until then, I appreciate you giving it to us secondhand here. Drew, maybe you can leave the people with a little bit of information of where they can keep in touch with you, what you got going on coming up.
Run my channel still, Como Comic Books. Got some top 10s that are kind of my bread and butter. I've got my own video about Heroes coming out here soon. That'll be a fun one. I've got a couple of fun things that I picked up there. But for the most part, you can find me there at the channel, over on Instagram at como.comic.books. And yeah, you never know where else I might pop up, but that's pretty much the main places.
All right. Well, I will put a link in the description for your Instagram and your YouTube, and we'll look forward to that Heroes Con video. But until we get that, Drew, thanks so much for hopping on the channel. We'll see you on the next one.